Hi everybody, Dan Bailey here with another super fun Fujifilm video. Before I start, I just wanted to remind you guys I'm offering my Photography on the Brain video lesson bundle for 50% off. In this 20 lesson series, I challenge you to think more deeply about your own creativity and your own image making process, and I give you some ideas and assignments that are designed to help push your own creative ideas and your own methodology towards image making in some new exciting directions. So check out the link right here for more information on my Photography on the Brain course and how to get your limited time 50% discount. In the course of a 12-month period, you take a lot of pictures. You press the shutter thousands of times, hoping to capture a few memorable, visually stunning shots. And even though you might end up throwing most of your frames away, you still learn something from every photo you take. When you look back, it's fun to notice the creative techniques that you picked up or perfected along the way, and the new styles that began to develop and emerge throughout the year. It's also fun to make note of the lenses that you use most during the course of that past year. After all, your lenses are the vital creative tools that allow you to take your own vision and transform them into a photograph. And so your lens choice is one of the most important and vital factors that influences the style and direction of your image making. You probably have a favorite lens or a favorite focal length, or maybe a couple different favorites depending on what you like to shoot. Going by the number of frames shot with each one, here are the 5 lenses that I use most in 2020, and a few examples to illustrate how I use each one. Hopefully these images will give you an idea of how you can use each different type of focal length in your own photography, even if you don't have these exact same lenses. So I'm going to start with the least most used lens and go up from there. So number 5 is the 55-200. The 55-200 is kind of a sleeper lens in the line. It's often one that gets lost in the cracks, especially since Fuji keeps coming out with more lenses. But it's actually a very good lens, and it's very sharp. Back when I first started shooting full-time with the Fujis in early 2014, this was my go-to telephoto. At the time, the 55-200 was Fuji's longest lens. They hadn't come out with a 50-140 yet, and so this was all we had. The 55-200 is by no means an exceptionally fast lens. However, it does have 4 distinct things going for it. It has a nice long range. That 200 millimeters, when compared to 35 millimeter or full frame, equates to about a 300 millimeter lens. So it creates those nice telephoto shots. You can pull things in from the distance and create those nice compression effects. It's also very sharp. I mean, come on, it's a Fuji lens. Everybody knows that Fuji makes great glass. It's also a nice size and weight. It's not very big, it's not extremely heavy or bulky. It's actually a great size for travel, for backpacking, for taking in the outdoors. I like this lens because it even fits in some of my smaller camera bags. And it has amazing lens stabilization. Fuji's OIS, optical image stabilization, works extremely well. I remember when I first got this lens, I was blown away by how low I could go with my shutter speeds, handheld, and still get sharp shots. I mean, I was zooming all the way out to 200 millimeters and shooting at 25th of a second and getting sharp images. I've always loved the photos I've shot with the 55-200. In fact, with some of those older shots from a few years ago, I hadn't actually remembered which lens I had used to get some of these favorites. And so I was pleasantly surprised when I looked at the metadata and saw that, yep, it was the 55-200. And since that time, I got the 50-140 and then the 100-400, so I kind of forgot about this one for a while. But the last couple years, I've been pulling it out and shooting with it again. And honestly, I've fallen in love with the 55-200 all over again. It really is a good lens. And as I said, it's a really easy, convenient lens to take with you into the backcountry. So with the romance rekindled, I've actually been using it quite a bit in the past year. In fact, last week, I went and did an aerial photography flight, and I used the 55-200 exclusively. I shot for about 2 hours in the air, pulling in all these distant mountains. So if you're looking for a versatile telephoto lens that doesn't cost too much, doesn't weigh too much, isn't too big, the 55-200 is an excellent choice. One thing to note, Fuji just announced the 70-300, a little bit bigger lens, a little bit heavier, longer telephoto, and weather sealed for only $100 more. So I see that 70-300 being an incredibly popular and capable lens as well. My 4th most used lens of 2020 is the 50-140 2.8. This is the classic Fuji workhorse telephoto zoom lens. It's their version of the venerable 70-200 2.8, which has been a staple tool for Canon and Nikon shooters for decades. It consistently ranks high on my most used lens list every year, because when I use this lens, I'm typically shooting in continuous mode and burning lots of frames. With very fast autofocus, fast 2.8 aperture, this is an ideal lens for shooting things like action, sports, and portraits. And if you have space for it in your camera bag and you're willing to carry the extra weight, it does an amazing job compressing distant scenes and pulling in those tight backgrounds when you're shooting landscapes. It also produces wonderful soft focus shallow depth of field effects behind your subject matter. I don't often travel with this lens unless I'm doing a workshop or an assignment somewhere, but when I am home I often use this lens for shooting things like bike racing, adventure sports, events, and nature. Number 3 on the list is the little tiny 50mm f2. I got the 50 f2 about 4 years ago, and it quickly became one of my favorite lenses. With its incredibly compact design, fast aperture, and weather sealing, this is an amazing little lens. I use this thing all the time. In fact, it's rare that I leave the house without the 50mm in my camera bag. With a focal length that equates to about 75mm, if you were to compare it to full frame, it sits right in the middle between a normal lens and something like an 85mm short telephoto. The result is that you have a comfortable working distance that allows you to get relatively close to your subjects and still get those wonderful soft depth of field shallow focus effects that makes your subject pop against the background. And it has a very close minimum focus distance of about 8 inches, and this adds to its great versatility. It's a wonderful lens to photograph things that are close to medium distances. And so for this reason, the 50 has been on my most used list every year since I got it. I did a full review of the 50 f2 on my channel a few months ago, so be sure and check that out. Number 2 is the 14mm f2.8. I love wide angles, and I always have. They let you capture the broad scene in front of you with expanded perspective and extremely wide depth of field where everything or close to everything is in focus. Or you can get really close to something and exaggerate the size and have everything else be slightly soft and off in the distance in the background. Move in really close and you can give extra prominence to those foreground subjects. Add a compelling background in your scene and you can create photos that have an incredible sense of depth. The Fuji 14 2.8 gives a very similar angle of view to my old favorite wide-angle lens, which was the Nikon 24 2.8. So I felt quite at home when I switched to Fuji and started using that 14. It was an easy transition to that lens, and in fact it was one of my first Fuji lenses I ever owned. 9 years later, and I'm still using it all the time to shoot action, travel, landscapes, environmental portraits, and every single year it makes my most used list. In fact, the last video I did was a full review of the 14 2.8, so you can be sure to check that out on my channel as well. And finally we come to my number 1 most used lens of 2020, and that's the 35mm f2. I've loved the 35 f2 since the day I got it, and it goes with me almost everywhere. It's pretty much my standard walk-around lens, and it's on there so much it's pretty much the default body cap for my X-T3, or whatever X-Series body I'm currently using. Consider this the APS-C version of the nifty 50, the quintessential normal lens that so many photographers started with when they were just beginning. Funny thing is that I started with a nifty 50 on my Nikons years ago, and then for some reason it fell out of favor with me and I didn't use the 50mm for years. But the moment I got the 35 f2, I fell in love with this normal view all over again, and I've been using it steadily ever since. Very much like the 50 f2, the 35 works extremely well for shooting subjects that are at close to medium distances, and it allows you to isolate those close subjects with a wonderful soft shallow depth of field effects. I've even shot action with the 35 and gotten good results. It's just a matter of trying not to get too far away from your subjects so you can use those shallow depth of field effects to create compelling shots. So there's my 5 most used lenses of 2020. I hope this inspires you and gives you some ideas of what you can do with your own lenses in a creative sense, even if you don't have these exact same models. So I want to thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel. Check out some of my other videos as well. If you're a Fuji shooter, you'll definitely want to check out my best-selling ebook, X-Series Unlimited. This 400-page guide is full of photos and information, and it'll show you everything you need to know in order to get the best performance and the most creative fun from your Fuji. So look for me on Patreon and social media at Dan Bailey Photo, and please check out my website and blog as well. So thanks again for watching. Have fun with your camera out there. Best of luck for 2021, and I'll see you next time.